What if the person destined to change your life appeared after you'd already stopped believing in love? Not every love story begins with fate. Some begin with a decision made in defiance, at a moment you never expected. October's breath whispered. Through the skyscrapers of Sterling City, a metropolis carved from ambition and lit by restless golden lights. The wind tasted like rain and steel as it curled through narrow streets, brushing against towering glass walls. 54 floors above the ground, in an office as cold and commanding as its occupant, Gabriel Cross stood before a wall of windows. He watched the city pulse beneath him, cars flickering like fallen stars, people swarming like ants. But none of it moved him. Not anymore. At 32, Gabriel had inherited an empire. He had wealth that didn't blink at global recessions, a reputation that made boardrooms hold their breath, and a mind sharpened by years of ruthless deals. But what he lacked, no amount of money could buy. He didn't believe in love. He'd seen what it did. How it demanded, then disappointed. How it could look like forever and fade like smoke. Love, in his world, was a liability. An illusion used to manipulate. A weakness best ignored. That morning, his father had summoned him to the marble tomb of a boardroom with a voice as cold as the granite table between them. Marry before your 33rd birthday, or the company passes to your cousin. No discussion, no exceptions. Just a command, disguised as tradition. Gabriel had not flinched. He never did, but inside something resisted. He didn't bend for rules, especially not when it came to something as contrived as marriage. That night, an invitation arrived at his penthouse. No signature, no sender. Only elegant lettering on black cardstock. An evening unlike any other. A private charity auction, one night only. He didn't plan to go, but curiosity, or maybe irritation, got the better of him. So he went, not to socialize, not to entertain sentiment. He went to prove a point. The Marionette Room was hidden, behind the mirrored walls of the Grand Lyon Hotel, a space reserved for the city's most elusive elite. Velvet curtains veiled secrets. The scent of wealth, power, and performance hung thick in the air. One by one, women were presented. Poised, polished, perfect. Not for themselves, but as illusions, companions for the highest bidder. Gabriel sat, still, detached, swirling a glass of aged scotch unmoved by the display. To him, this was evidence that everything, people included, had a price. And then she walked in, not walked, appeared. She didn't sparkle, she didn't seduce, she didn't even try. She simply was Amara Fields, 24. A name he didn't know yet, but somehow felt like a whisper from a forgotten part of himself. She stepped into the light in a plain ivory dress. No makeup, no pretense. Her shoulders were bare, her soft brown hair falling loosely around her face. Her eyes, wide, unguarded, held a quiet ache that made the room fall still. Gabriel sat forward. Something fluttered in his chest. Alien. Unwanted. She didn't move like someone trying to be chosen. She moved like someone forced to be seen. There was no practiced smile, no flirtation, only truth and sorrow. And yet she glowed. A murmur spread through the room, but Gabriel heard none of it. He couldn't look away. She stood on that stage, more vulnerable than any woman he'd ever met, more real than any deal he'd ever signed. The bidding began. Softly at first. 10,000. 20. Then a man with a glint of greed in his eyes raised his paddle. 100,000, he said, like he was purchasing art. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He didn't understand what moved him next. He didn't blink, didn't shift. He simply raised his paddle. 1 million. The room shattered into silence. All eyes turned to him, even hers. She looked directly at him, startled, uncertain. Her fingers trembled. She hadn't expected this. Neither had he. Gabriel rose slowly, adjusted his jacket, and gave the room a look that said, "Don't question me." He wasn't bidding for pleasure. He was making a statement. To his father, to the board, to himself. That night, as the auction ended and Amara was led to him, he extended his hand as if closing a business deal. "One evening," he said. She took it, hesitantly. Her touch was cold, her grip unsure. But something in that fragile contact whispered what neither of them could say yet. This wasn't just a transaction. They stepped into the October night together, the wind pressing against them, and neither of them knew it yet, but this night would change everything. A few miles away from the shimmering towers of Sterling City, in a quieter corner of Eastwell District, Amara Fields stood behind the counter of Rosewood Bakery. The scent of cinnamon, sugar, and fresh bread wrapped around her like a warm coat against the cold reality of her life. She was 24, but carried herself like someone twice her age, graceful, composed, and worn thin by the weight of survival. Her eyes, soft brown like polished walnut, were calm but tired. Her hands moved with practiced precision, wrapping cookies and tying ribbons with fingers dusted in flour. She had no time for dreams, not since the car crash at 15 that stole her parents and forced her into motherhood far too soon. Since then, every breath, every step, every dollar had gone to raising her younger sister, Nina. 16 now, fragile, bright. Born with a heart condition that didn't care how hard Amara worked or how much she prayed. Nina was the reason Amara smiled at strangers when her back ached, the reason she pushed through double shifts, the reason she sold homemade cupcakes at community fairs and woke before sunrise to deliver morning papers. But Nina's condition was worsening. The fainting spells had become hospital stays. The bruises came from nothing. The pain? From everything. And then came the doctor's words. She needs a transplant. Soon. The surgery costs $200,000. Without it, she has less than 3 months. Amara sat beside her sister's hospital bed that night, stroking her damp hair as machines hummed in the background. Nina's hand, pale and small, rested in hers. And despite everything, the girl smiled. Amara did too. But inside she was drowning. She sold what little she had. Her mother's silver necklace, her father's old watch. She begged old friends, applied for loans, cried into her pillow when there was no one left to ask. That's when Rosa, a former co-worker from her waitressing days, reappeared with a whispered offer. "There's another way. A charity auction," she said. "One night. Dinner only. No strings. Wealthy men. Private contracts. Fast money. You'll make more in a night than in a year," Rosa promised. Amara's instinct recoiled. The idea of standing on a stage offered, like a prize, it scraped against her bones. It wasn't who she was. But then she thought of Nina's hospital monitor beeping, of the unpaid bills, of the calendar filled with silent, closing days. Just one night, she told herself. She signed the contract with a trembling hand. "Dinner only," she whispered. The organizer smiled politely, but didn't meet her eyes. Amara didn't see the cold calculation in his gaze. She didn't know that once the curtain lifted, some choices wouldn't be hers anymore. That evening, backstage at the Marionette Room, Amara stood behind crimson velvet, her hands trembling as they clutched the fabric of her dress. The sounds of laughter and glasses clinking echoed through the walls. Names were called, prices whispered, lives decided. When they called hers, she walked forward on legs that felt too light to carry her truth. The chandeliers above sparkled. The men below watched with eyes that measured worth in numbers. She was wearing the only dress they gave her. Ivory. Modest. A lie of purity for men who saw none. She forced a smile. "It barely held. 10,000, someone said. 50. 100! She kept her eyes low, willing the room to swallow her whole, willing this moment to pass. And then, 1,000,000! Her head snapped up instinctively, her gaze locked, onto a man across the room. Tall, dressed in black, eyes like stone, Gabriel Cross. She didn't know his name, but his presence hit her like thunder in a silent room. Cold, calculated, absolute. The host stumbled over words. 1,000,000. From Mr. Cross. No further bids. The auction ended in stunned silence. They brought her to him. Her heart beat erratically, her mouth dry. He didn't smile, didn't leer. He extended his hand like he was sealing a business deal. "Miss Fields," he said, with the cool sharpness of a contract. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, unsure of what she was agreeing to anymore. "Why?" she asked softly. He smirked, just barely. "To prove a point," he said, eyes glittering with something unreadable. "That everything, even you, has a price." His words cut sharper than she expected. But Gabriel Cross didn't know the kind of woman Amara was. She'd already sold pieces of herself long before tonight. Her time, her rest, her childhood, but never her self-respect. She inhaled deeply, her voice quivering but steady. "You can buy my time," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. "But not my dignity." For a flicker of a moment, something unreadable passed through his expression. Then it was gone, buried beneath that detached calm he wore like a shield. "We'll see?" he murmured, turning and gesturing for her to follow. They arrived at Éclat, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Everything shimmered. Glass, crystal, flame. But the warmth didn't reach either of them. Amara sat across from him, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. She barely touched her food. She thought of Nina, thought of hospital halls and silent prayers. She would endure this night. But what she didn't know was that she had just stepped into Gabriel Cross's world, and more importantly, into his heart. The dinner had ended hours ago, but Gabriel Cross remained awake, alone in his penthouse, staring out at the sleeping city from behind a wall of glass. Sterling City glittered like diamonds scattered across a black velvet cloth, but he saw none of it. What he did see again and again was the moment she said it. "You can buy my time, but not my dignity." He'd heard countless women speak in clever tones, calculated flattery veiled in sweetness. But Amara Fields was different. She didn't ask about his wealth. She didn't try to charm him. She didn't even pretend to be impressed. She simply endured, with quiet strength. And now, for the first time in years, Gabriel felt unsettled. A file rested unopened on his desk, delivered by his assistant minutes after midnight. He hesitated, then slid it open. Amara Fields. Age, 24. Occupation, bakery assistant at Rosewood. Parents, deceased. Legal guardian of one minor. Nina Fields, 16. Medical congenital heart condition. Urgent transplant required. Gabriel paused at the photo. Amara, flower on her cheek, smiling gently as she handed a child a cookie. No jewelry, no vanity, just warmth. The contrast between her world and his was staggering, and yet, she lingered in his thoughts like perfume on a winter coat. She hadn't lingered after dinner, hadn't asked for another meeting, hadn't tried to stay. She didn't want anything from him, which made her unforgettable. The next morning, Gabriel stood in the glass tower of Cross International, overlooking Central Park. He held the file in one hand, but his thoughts were far from business. His father's demand still echoed in the back of his mind: marry by year's end, or hand over the company. An arranged marriage had already been drafted, a cold union with a woman selected by the board, connected, appropriate, emotionless. But Gabriel hated being manipulated. And Amara, she didn't belong to this world, which made her perfect, not as a wife. As a solution, she needed money. He needed a wife. Nothing more. It was clean, simple, controlled. Or so he thought. A week later, the bell above the bakery chimed, and Amara glanced up from behind the counter. She froze. Gabriel Cross stood in the doorway, dark suit, unreadable face, completely out of place among pastries and lace curtains. He didn't speak immediately, just scanned the humble space as if trying to make sense of her world. "Mr. Cross," she said slowly, cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "I have a proposal," he said simply, gesturing toward the small table by the window. Amara hesitated, then followed. Her heart thudded dully beneath her apron. She sat. Her fingers clutched each other beneath the table. Gabriel leaned forward. His voice was even, deliberate. "Marry me. For 1 year." Amara blinked. "What?" "I'll cover everything. Your sister's surgery, treatment, post-op recovery. Every cost. You'll live comfortably. You'll have privacy. And in return..." His voice dropped slightly. "You'll be my wife, in public." He paused, then clarified. "Strictly appearances, events, functions. No physical expectations, no emotional obligations." Her breath caught. She stared at him like he'd offered her a house of gold, and set it on fire at the same time. "Why me?" she whispered. He didn't blink. "Because you're not part of my world. You don't want anything from me. That makes this clean." His voice sounded clinical, detached. But she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something uncertain, something lonely. Still, her pulse raced. The idea was outrageous, insane. Marriage? To a man she barely knew? A year in his cold marble world? But then she thought of Nina, lying in that hospital bed, whispering, "Someday, I want to see the ocean." Tears burned the back of her throat. "I need time," she whispered. Gabriel nodded. 24 hours. He slid a sleek business card across the table, then stood without another word. That night, Amara sat beside Nina's hospital bed. Monitors blinked softly in the dark. Her sister slept peacefully, thin, fragile, fighting a battle her body wasn't built for. Amara held her hand and cried silently. She imagined a world where Nina could run, swim, breathe. But that world cost more than she could earn in a lifetime, and Gabriel Cross was offering it. The next morning, Amara stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the business card. Her hand trembled. Her voice didn't. She picked up the phone. "I'll do it," she said. 1 year. For my sister. Nothing more. The contract arrived the next day. 40 pages, thick with legal clauses and polished phrasing. 1-year marriage, no expectations of intimacy. Monthly stipend. Full medical care for Nina Fields. Absolute confidentiality. It read like a corporate merger, because that's exactly what it was. Amara packed in silence. Just a few clothes, her favorite worn copy of Anne of Green Gables, and a photo of her and Nina on a sunlit boardwalk. She didn't take anything else, because she knew she was leaving more than just a home behind. She was leaving her life. What waited ahead wasn't a romance. It was a bargain, a desperate agreement, a contract with a man who believed love was a myth, and whose world she was about to enter. The driver said nothing as the car glided through the city. The streets blurred past in streaks of silver and shadow, but Amara Fields barely noticed. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the skyline ahead. She had signed her life into a contract, not for love, not for comfort, for Nina. The car pulled up to a towering steel and glass monolith on the East End. the kind of place where silence had its own echo and every surface gleamed. Like it didn't belong to real life. She stepped out, clutching her small duffel bag like armor. Inside, the penthouse of Gabriel Cross looked like something out of a modern painting. Sharp lines, cold beauty, minimal warmth, everything in its place, except her. She stood at the threshold, shoulders tense. Gabriel greeted her with a nod. Not a smile, not even a welcome. "Your room is down the hall," he said, voice brisk. "If you need anything, the staff can arrange it." Amara swallowed her discomfort. "Thank you," she said softly, though it felt like speaking into stone. She didn't belong here, but she was here, for Nina. She kept repeating that to herself, even as the days began to pass like chapters from a life she didn't recognize. In the first few weeks, they were like strangers sharing a stage. Gabriel was always working, meetings, galas, mergers. He came home late, often in silence, sometimes with a stiff nod, and nothing more. Amara moved through the penthouse like a ghost, always quiet, always out of the way. She refused help from the staff, folded her own laundry, cooked simple meals, tomato soup, lentil stew. Sometimes she left a portion for Gabriel in the fridge, never knowing if he ate it. He noticed. He noticed the way she placed a napkin just so, how she folded the dish towel after drying her hands. He noticed the book she read at night. Always the same, its cover frayed and pages soft with time. Anne of Green Gables. Something about that comforted him, but they rarely spoke. When they did, it was like exchanging weather reports. The only warmth in Amara's life came from the hospital. Each morning, she took the subway to see Nina. The doctors had begun prepping her for surgery. Her condition was stable, just barely. But there was hope now, hope Amara had never dared to hold. She sat beside her sister's bed for hours, reading to her, feeding her, brushing back her hair. Nina smiled more now, laughed sometimes. She'd ask about Gabriel. "Is he nice?" Amara would hesitate. "He keeps his promises." She didn't say how cold the penthouse was, how quiet Gabriel had become, how they hadn't had a real conversation since the day she signed the contract. Back at the penthouse, the marble floors reflected her bare feet. The walk-in closet offered designer gowns she never touched. The private chef waited most nights for orders she never placed. She didn't want to be waited on. She wanted normal, so she baked, cleaned, listened to music softly on her old earbuds, made tea with honey and sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching a world she didn't feel part of. One evening, Gabriel came home later than usual. The weight of another corporate war hung on his shoulders. The board had pushed back on an acquisition. His father had called, again, with venom disguised as concern. He walked through the door, jacket slung over one arm. Then he smelled it. Onions. Garlic. Thyme. He paused. Home. It smelled like home. He stepped into the kitchen, confused, and saw her, Amara. Hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, stirring something on the stove. She was humming. Just faintly. The hum cut through the noise in his mind. "What are you doing?" he asked, sharper than intended. She jumped slightly, nearly dropping the ladle. I was making soup," she said, cheeks coloring. "I thought maybe you hadn't eaten." He stared for a beat, then nodded. He sat at the kitchen counter. She ladled soup into a bowl and placed it gently before him. Carrots, potatoes, broth, herbs. Nothing extravagant. But the warmth of it, real warmth, sank into him deeper than any three-course meal ever. Had he didn't say anything as he ate, and she didn't ask for anything while she cleaned. For the first time in years, Gabriel Cross felt still. Their marriage was paper, a contract, terms and signatures. But that night, as Amara drifted quietly down the hall with a dish towel still in her hand, something shifted In him, in her, in the air between them, not with grand gestures, but with one bowl of soup and the softest hum from a girl who had no place in his world, and yet was slowly changing it. The morning after the soup, Gabriel Cross sat in his sleek office tower, surrounded by glass and silence. But something was different. The spreadsheets on his screen blurred. The financial reports might as well have been blank. His thoughts were filled with the scent of thyme and potatoes, with the image of Amara Fields, hair tied back, cheeks pink, quietly offering warmth in a bowl. He hadn't meant to linger at the counter that night. He hadn't meant to eat all of it. But he had. And he'd finished every bite. Amara didn't mention it. She hadn't expected gratitude. She didn't cook for appreciation or praise. She cooked because it grounded her. Because the motions were familiar. Because it reminded her that she was still human, even if she lived in a world where everything echoed. The next day, she made tea and left 2 cups on the counter, one marked with her initial, one unmarked. She didn't ask if he drank it, but he did. He began noticing small things. The way she tied her apron with a double knot. How she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she read. How she always left an extra folded napkin next to his seat, even if she didn't sit with him. She never demanded space, but she made her presence felt like a whisper in a quiet room. Weeks passed. Gabriel's days remained full, conferences, press, deadlines. But his nights began to shift. He came home a little earlier, stayed a little longer in the kitchen doorway. Not to talk, just to listen. Amara was still quiet. Still careful, but every now and then she'd say something small. How was your meeting? Did you try the bread? You missed the sunset tonight. Tiny sentences, but they rooted in him like seeds. At the hospital, Nina was recovering well. Amara visited daily, often staying past sunset. She read aloud, brought fresh flowers, and sometimes left drawings on the whiteboard, a sun, a daisy, a little heart. Nina asked more questions now. Do you like him? Amara never answered directly. Instead, she'd smile and say, he keeps his promises. Back at the penthouse, the lines between obligation and habit blurred. Amara cooked. Always something simple. Vegetable stew, roasted chicken, fresh baked bread. She never asked if he liked it. Gabriel never said a word about it, but one night, she forgot to leave an extra plate. He noticed. He stood in the kitchen longer than usual, confused at the empty counter. The next day, the extra plate returned, and so did the quiet peace it carried. One evening, the rain painted streaks against the windows. Thunder rolled in the distance as Amara lit a single candle on the dining table, not for romance, but for calm. She set down 2 bowls of lentil soup. Gabriel entered, removed his coat, and hesitated. Then, something unfamiliar happened. He sat. Voluntarily. At the table, no phone, no documents, just silence. Amara sat across from him. For the first time since they signed the contract, they ate a full meal together. No negotiations, no legalities, just 2 people, a meal, a candle. Halfway through, she glanced up. You don't have to keep eating if you don't like it. Gabriel looked at her, then back at his bowl. It's good. It was the first compliment he had given her. She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes softened, like thawing ice. Later that night, Gabriel stood outside her door, paused for a breath, and whispered to no one. She's not what I expected. He didn't knock, he didn't enter. He just stood there for a while in the silence, feeling something he hadn't let himself feel in years, not desire, not even affection, but peace. And in a world built from power, performance, and expectations, peace was rare and precious. 3 months into the arrangement, the penthouse no longer echoed like a museum. Something had changed. The rooms still gleamed. The windows still stretched from floor to ceiling. But now there were soft footsteps in the hall, the scent of simmering broth in the air, and the faint sound of humming from the kitchen. Amara Fields had never tried to make this place a home, but somehow, it had begun to feel like one. Not through decoration, not through design, but through her presence. She didn't touch the designer clothes in the walk-in closet. She still wore her comfortable cardigans, her hair always tucked back with a pencil when she cooked. She still rode the subway to the hospital, even though Gabriel had offered a driver more than once. She said she preferred the walk, that she liked blending into the crowd. But the truth was, she needed those moments of anonymity, moments that reminded her who she still was. Gabriel Cross noticed everything. He noticed the book she kept rereading, the corners now even more curled, the pages worn soft by worry and quiet evenings. He noticed the gentle way she spoke to the nurses at the hospital when he accompanied her on rare visits, the way her voice turned to warmth when she said Nina's name. She was careful around him still, polite, grateful, but distant. And he couldn't blame her. After all, their foundation was built on a transaction. She hadn't chosen him. She hadn't fallen into this life by romance. She'd done it to save her sister. That knowledge sat like a stone in his chest. Still, something about her quiet grace unsettled him. He'd been around powerful women his entire life, socialites, CEOs, heiresses, but none of them had ever made his world feel gentler. Amara did that simply by being. Their paths remained parallel. Mornings passed in silence. Evenings, too. When they crossed in the kitchen, their conversations were short. "How's Nina today?" "She's holding on. The doctors are hopeful." "Good." But the silences weren't empty anymore. They were full of the things neither dared to say. One night, Gabriel came home early. A thunderstorm had canceled a meeting. He entered to the smell of chocolate. Amara stood at the stove, apron dusted with flour, stirring a pot of melted fudge. Her hair was messier than usual, lips slightly parted in focus. He didn't speak, just watched. "Do you like chocolate?" she asked without turning. He blinked. "Yes," she nodded. "It's Nina's favorite. I'm bringing her some tomorrow." He lingered in the doorway. "You're good with her," he said after a pause. Amara looked up. "She's my entire world." He didn't say it aloud, but the words echoed inside him. "And you're becoming part of mine." In public, they played their roles. The polished CEO, the elegant wife. They attended charity galas, posed for the media, stood side by side like the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, the distance remained. Amara would curl up in the reading nook with her book. Gabriel would retreat to his study, watching her from the reflection in the glass. He told himself he was imagining things, the way his pulse quickened when she smiled, the way her laughter, quiet and rare, lingered long after she left the room. This was supposed to be business, a contract, clean, controlled. But Gabriel was no longer sure what he was trying to control, because the more he watched her move through his world, without asking for anything, without trying to impress, the more he wanted her to stay, not because he needed a wife for the board, not because of his father's ultimatum, but because he had never felt more like himself than when she was near, and that scared him more than anything. Amara felt it too. The slow unraveling. The way her chest fluttered when Gabriel brought flowers to the hospital, unannounced, just to make Nina smile. The way his voice softened when he asked about her day. The way he lingered in the kitchen a little longer each night, listening to her hum. She told herself it meant nothing, that it couldn't mean anything. This wasn't a love story. This was a deal. A countdown with a deadline. But late at night, when the city lights glimmered outside her window, and she was wrapped in one of his soft sweaters she found in the closet, she wondered what it would be like if it were real. If he were real. If the man behind the suits, the man who ate her soup in silence, who stood outside Nina's hospital room without being asked, was someone she could trust, someone she could love. They were walking a tightrope, too close to pretend, too afraid to fall. Each glance, each touch, each shared meal was a step closer to the edge. The contract still lay folded in a drawer. A boundary. But boundaries blur, and hearts don't read fine print. Not when the smallest things, his quiet, her presence, were starting to feel like everything. Far from the quiet bond blooming between them, Celeste Cross watched from a distance, her heart cold with resentment, her mind filled with doubt. At 26, Celeste had always been the most important woman in Gabriel's life. His little sister, his shadow, his confidant. She was used to having his attention, his protection, his time. But now? Now, a woman named Amara Field stood in her place. Celeste didn't trust her. Couldn't understand her. How could someone like that, a nobody from a bakery, a charity auction girl, be the one person Gabriel opened up to? He smiled differently now. Softer. Real. Celeste saw it, and it terrified her. She's not one of us, she whispered to herself. She's dangerous. So Celeste did what she had always done when something threatened her world. She tried to control it. She hired a private investigator, not because she had proof of anything, but because she needed to find something. Anything. And that's when she discovered Marcus Hale, an engineer, kind-eyed, recently returned from overseas, and Amara's childhood friend. Marcus visited Nina often, brought flowers, books, light conversation. He and Amara had history, old photos, shared stories, inside jokes. To Celeste, it was enough. Then came the moment, a single afternoon. Amara had just come from a long shift, her emotions worn thin from a difficult meeting with Nina's doctor. In the hallway, she broke down. Marcus caught her as she stumbled. She cried into his shoulder. He hugged her. Just a hug. Nothing more. No kiss. No whisper. No promise. But Celeste's photographer captured it. The photo was manipulated, just slightly. The lighting softened. The angle shifted. It was enough to tell a lie. Celeste didn't stop there. She fabricated a string of text messages between Amara and Marcus. Crafted phrases that sounded casual but sinister in implication. He suspects nothing. Just a few more months and we're free. It's only a contract. They were fiction, designed to destroy. She slipped everything into an envelope, on the front, in bold script. Julian, she's not who you think she is. I warned you. That night, Gabriel returned home with his chest full of something fragile and terrifying. He had spent the day rehearsing what he wanted to say. He was going to tear up the contract. He was going to ask her to stay, not for obligation, but for love. He was finally ready. But then his phone buzzed, a message from Celeste. He opened the images, and his world collapsed. Amara's arms around another man, her face buried in his shoulder. Fabricated message beneath the photo. I can't wait until the contract ends. His blood ran cold, not because the photo was damning, but because a part of him, a part he hated, believed it. All those weeks of careful closeness, the soft glances, the meals, the humming. Were they just acts? Had he been foolish enough to think she could care? His heart hardened. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just froze. Amara returned late from the hospital, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. But Nina had smiled that day, laughed even. There was hope again. She stepped into the penthouse, smelling the faint memory of soup on the stove, and saw Gabriel standing in the dark, his back to her, a photo in his hand. Gabriel? She asked gently. He didn't move. He simply dropped the photo onto the marble table. She picked it up, blinking in confusion. Then her heart sank. "Marcus," she whispered. "He's my best friend. That day, I know what I see," Gabriel said coldly, turning to face her. His eyes were ice. "You think I'm a fool? Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Let me explain. You played it perfectly, didn't you?" His voice trembled, not with anger, but betrayal. The sweet, selfless girl, just desperate enough to seem believable. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of it. "I didn't. Gabriel, I never. You wanted money for your sister. You got it. You lived in comfort, played the role. Congratulations." Tears streamed down her face. "I never wanted your money," she said, broken. But she couldn't say it. Not now. Not like this. "The contract is over," Gabriel said. His voice was final. "Leave." She packed in silence, took only what she came with, a few clothes, a photograph of Nina, a worn copy of Anne, of Green Gables. She left behind every dress, every gift, every piece of the life they had begun to build, not out of pride, but because it hurt too much to carry pieces of something he believed had been a lie. At the door, she paused. "I never wanted your empire," she whispered. "I only ever wanted you to believe in me." But he didn't answer, didn't turn, didn't speak. So she left, and the sound of the door closing behind her felt like the final chapter ripped from a book. Outside, the wind howled, but she felt nothing, because inside, Amara Fields had already gone numb. The wind outside the penthouse howled like a warning, but Amara Fields didn't feel it. She didn't feel anything. She walked through the city as if the ground no longer remembered her steps. Her suitcase was light, only essentials, but her heart dragged behind her like an anchor. The man who once watched her hum in the kitchen, the man who brought her wildflowers to the hospital, had looked her in the eyes and said, "Leave," and, worse, he believed she'd used him, that she'd lied, played him. He hadn't even asked, he'd just decided, and Amara, broken as she was, had no strength left to fight for something that should have never needed defending. She returned to Eastwell, too. The apartment she hadn't seen in months. The flickering hallway light still buzzed. The air smelled of old walls and cheap detergent. She stepped inside. The silence swallowed her whole. It used to be a haven, a space filled with Nina's laughter, music, pancakes at midnight, late-night drawings on the fridge. Now it was just a box of memories with peeling paint. She sat on the edge of the bed, took out the photo of Nina, ran her thumb over her sister's smile. She wanted to call her, to hear her voice, but she couldn't, because if she spoke, she might shatter. So she didn't. She just sat, and the world spun on without her. 3 days. Later, the call came. A doctor, soft-voiced, hesitant. "There were complications. We tried everything. I'm so sorry." Nina was gone. The phone slipped from Amara's fingers. Her knees hit the floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just silence. Just the crushing, endless silence of grief. She stumbled to the hospital, arms numb, face blank. Her body moved, but her soul lagged miles behind. When she entered the room, her baby sister looked like she was sleeping. Still, peaceful, too quiet. Amara reached out and held her hand, already cool, and rested her forehead on Nina's chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I promised I'd protect you. I failed." She didn't cry loud, just broke. Quietly, completely. After the funeral, Amara returned to the apartment, but not to herself. She took a job at a 24-hour diner nearby. Washed dishes, served coffee. Refused to speak more than she had to. She no longer smiled, no longer hummed, no longer read. The photo of Nina? thrown into a drawer she never opened again. To survive, she had to become someone else. So she did. Someone with no memories. No hope. No heartbeat. Just a shadow. "She's like a ghost," one coworker whispered. And they were right. The girl with the soft eyes and unshakable resolve had disappeared. All that remained was a shell with a name tag, Amara. But even that didn't feel like hers anymore. Back in Sterling City, at the top of the glass tower he once ruled, Gabriel Cross sat in his corner office surrounded by everything that used to define him: power, status, silence. But it all felt hollow. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that Amara had betrayed him, that she was like everyone else. But no matter how many times he repeated it, the ache wouldn't leave, and neither would the truth that kept circling the edges of his mind. Something didn't add up. She'd never asked for anything, never lingered, never even hinted at staying past the contract, and yet, he hadn't let her explain. He'd just thrown her away. Then, one afternoon, it arrived. An anonymous, "Email no subject, no sender, just a line. You need to see this." Attached was a folder, the original, untouched photo. Just Amara and Marcus Hale, a single hug in a hospital hallway, a moment of grief and comfort. Nothing romantic, nothing secret. Then came the receipts. Private investigator payments, digital image edits, phone number spoof logs, all traced back to Celeste. Gabriel's blood ran cold. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. He stormed into his sister's apartment with a fury he hadn't felt in years. "Why?" he demanded. Celeste's face crumbled under the weight of his glare. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. "She didn't belong in our world. I thought she'd hurt you." Gabriel stepped back, like her words struck him. "Physically. She was the only thing that ever made me feel whole," he said, his voice low, broken. "And you destroyed her." He left without another word, and he never looked back. That same day, Gabriel resigned from Cross International, stepped down from the board, cut ties with his family. He walked away from everything, because none of it mattered. Not the company, not the fortune, not even his name. There was only one thing that mattered now: finding her. Not to fix the past, not even to ask for forgiveness, but to look her in the eyes and say what he should have said all along. "I was wrong." But she was gone. Her apartment was empty. The diner didn't know where she'd gone. She'd quit. No forwarding address. He checked every place she'd ever been: Rosewood Bakery, the hospital, the park where she sketched with Nina. Gone. Then, finally, a lead. A former coworker mentioned she'd packed a single bag and vanished. Quietly. With no goodbye. Just like that. Gabriel Cross, once a man who ruled boardrooms and built empires, was now a man chasing whispers. He drove through small towns, walked unfamiliar streets, asked quiet questions in diners and bookstores. He didn't know what he'd say if he found her. He didn't even expect her to speak to him. He just wanted to know she was okay. That the woman with the daisy smile hadn't disappeared forever. Back. In the penthouse, untouched and silent, a vase of dried white daisies sat hidden in a cabinet, their petals brittle, still intact, just like his heart, still holding on, still waiting. Rain fell like a confession over the forgotten town of Havenwood. The streets were narrow and quiet. The houses leaned with age. Everything smelled of wet earth and unspoken grief. Standing beneath a rusted street lamp, drenched to the bone, was Gabriel Cross, but not the version the world knew. No sharp suit, no tailored coat, no empire at his back. Just a man with tired eyes, muddy boots, and a heart heavy with guilt. He had been searching for Amara Fields for 2 months, 2 long months of dead ends, locked doors, and whispered, "I think I saw her once." From strangers in quiet cafes, he had given up everything, his title, his wealth, his name, all for one hope, that somewhere out here, the woman he broke still existed, even if she never forgave him, even if she never said a word. He just needed to know she was alive. He found her, by accident and fate, the Rusty Spoon. A small cafe on Havenwood's only main street. Its sign flickered weakly in the rain. Gabriel pushed through the door, the scent of cinnamon and old coffee rushing over. And there she was, Amara, behind the counter, in a faded green apron, hair tied back in a loose knot, her hands wrapped around a dish towel, her face pale, hollow. She looked like someone who had forgotten how to dream. She wiped a glass without looking up. She didn't see him. Not yet. But he saw everything. The light that had once filled her eyes was gone, and the moment shattered something inside him. He stumbled back outside, breath ragged, heart pounding like a warning bell. The rain swallowed him. He waited by the alley behind the cafe, not sure what he was hoping for. Redemption, forgiveness, even just recognition. But what he truly feared was that there was nothing left in her to offer him even that. Eventually, she stepped out. Thin coat wrapped tight, small umbrella barely shielding her from the downpour. Her steps were slow, her gaze down. She looked like someone moving through the world without believing she was part of it. Amara. His voice cracked through the storm. She stopped, but she didn't turn. Her fingers clutched the umbrella tighter. He ran toward her, feet splashing through puddles, heart hammering. "Amara, please, look at me." Slowly she turned, their eyes met, and Gabriel Cross, who once signed billion-dollar deals without blinking, broke, because she looked at him like a stranger. No fury, no tears, just emptiness. As if he were a dream she'd already forgotten. He stepped closer, voice trembling. "I've been searching for you everywhere. I didn't know about Nina. I didn't know until after. I should have." She said nothing. Rain trickled down her cheeks, mixing with tears she no longer let herself feel. He swallowed. Celeste lied. She forged everything. The photo, the messages. It was all her. "I was wrong, Amara. I was so wrong." Still. Silence. The umbrella in her hand trembled, but her face didn't change. Gabriel's knees hit the ground, in the mud, in the rain, in the middle of Havenwood's back alley. He knelt for the woman he destroyed. "If you can't love me anymore," he whispered, "then let me love you from a distance." "I won't ask for anything. Just let me stay close." He looked up, eyes pleading, but Amara didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't curse him. What she did was worse. She simply turned and walked away. She didn't look back, and he didn't move. Not for minutes. Not for hours. He stayed kneeling in the mud, soaking, shaking, staring after her until the rain finally stopped. But the storm inside him didn't. Gabriel didn't leave Havenwood. Not that night. Not the next. Not even when he realized she might never speak to him again. He rented a small house at the edge of town. No assistance, no car service. Just a man rebuilding from the ashes of regret. Every morning, he walked to the cafe, sat in the far corner, ordered coffee, watched quietly, never spoke, never stared, just remained. She knew. She felt him. Not a presence that pressed, but one that waited. He never asked for forgiveness, because some wounds weren't meant to be patched with words. Some pain could only be healed by presence. Amara Fields didn't confront him, not at first. She continued pouring coffee, cleaning tables, serving regulars, but she no longer felt invisible. His silence didn't demand. It simply existed, like a promise that hadn't been made but had been kept, and that, somehow, meant more than any apology ever could. She wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't ready to open the door to that kind of hurt again. But she was no longer pretending. He wasn't there, and in that simple truth, something had started, something quiet, something real. Amara Fields moved through her days like mist, present, but never quite there. She poured coffee, wiped tables, washed dishes, took her tips without looking up. She spoke little, smiled less, but every morning, without fail, Gabriel Cross came. Same booth, same time, same silence. He ordered one black coffee, never touched it, never stayed too long, never asked for anything. He just sat, watching her from the corner of his eye, but never directly. Waiting. She didn't know what to do with that kind of love, the kind that didn't demand or chase, the kind that didn't knock on doors but simply waited outside them. She wasn't ready to forgive. Her heart still bore the raw scars of betrayal, grief, and solitude. Nina was gone. Her old life was gone, and the part of her that had once dreamed of love had died in a hospital hallway. But still, he came. One morning, it was raining again. Not heavy, just soft enough to turn the streets to mirrors. Gabriel saw the flickering bulb above her door. That night, he bought the tools, borrowed a ladder from a local hardware store, and fixed it himself. He didn't leave a note, just light. Then came the path, a winding stretch of road Amara walked each night from the cafe to her little rented house on the edge of town. There were no street lamps, only shadows. So Gabriel planted small solar lights, one by one, along the path, quietly, anonymously. The next time she walked home, the road shimmered like a trail of stars. She didn't need to ask who had done it. Her breath caught, but she didn't. Turn around. Some mornings, a small brown bag waited outside the cafe door. Inside, sandwiches, muffins, a bottle of water. All labeled simply, "You need to eat too." Amara never acknowledged them, but she always ate them. One day, the cafe's kitchen assistant called in sick. Gabriel stepped in. He couldn't cook. He overboiled pasta, burned toast, sliced his thumb cutting, celery. But he stayed. Amara watched in silent disbelief as the man who once owned skyscrapers fumbled with a coffee machine. She didn't laugh. But for the first time in months, she almost did. The next evening, he left a plate of spaghetti by the weigh register. The sauce was uneven. The garlic was heavy. Beside it, a handwritten note. "You haven't eaten all day. Please." She stared at it, then slowly picked up the fork. And when she took the first bite, it wasn't the flavor that caught her. It was the care. And that made her eyes sting. After that, he started leaving flowers, not roses, nothing extravagant, just simple wildflowers, daisies, bellflowers, sprigs of lavender, tied together with twine and left on the windowsill. No notes. No expectations. Just small, quiet offerings from a man who no longer knew how to love loudly, so he loved silently. And somehow, that was louder than anything else ever had been. Weeks passed, then months. Havenwood bloomed with spring. The frost melted from the fields. The air carried the scent of soil and sunlight. And Amara? She started breathing again, slowly, carefully. She began sketching again. Flowers, rooftops, the winding path Gabriel had lit. She didn't know why she did it. Until one afternoon, a little girl at the cafe asked, "Can you teach me?" And Amara, to her own surprise, said, "Yes." That week, she started an art class at the town's community center, just twice a week, just kids. But it was the first thing that made her feel like herself in a very, very long time. Gabriel never stepped inside. But he stood outside by the window and watched her, her sleeves rolled up, her hair in a bun, surrounded by laughter, crayons, and light. He never smiled, but his chest ached in the best way. He didn't need her to come back. He just needed her to be alive again. One afternoon, she came home and found her garden fence painted. Clean, white, neat. The tools were gone. No note. No sign. But she didn't need one. She just stood there, hand over her chest, and breathed. Gabriel had stopped hoping for her love. He just hoped she'd keep smiling, even if it wasn't for him. A full year passed, and in that time, Amara Fields returned. To herself. Not fully, not completely, but enough to remember who she used to be. Her eyes no longer looked hollow. Her cheeks filled out. Her laugh, though rare, was real. She started hanging her drawings around her little home, sketches of wildflowers, stars, Nina, and one sketch, quietly tucked on her nightstand, of a man sitting in a booth, drinking cold coffee beneath a flickering cafe light. In his small rented home, Gabriel kept a jar of dried wildflowers on the kitchen counter, the first she ever accepted. They were brittle now. The colors had faded, but to him, they were sacred, because they reminded him of the season when hope returned. He didn't know if she would ever love him again, but he had made peace with that, because loving her quietly, asking for nothing, waiting, without expectation, had become the only thing that made sense anymore. And that kind of love, the kind that waits, that endures, that asks for nothing but her happiness, that was the kind that changes everything. Spring in Havenwood arrived gently. No grand declarations, no dramatic changes. Just warmth creeping into the soil, buds unfurling slowly, like sighs from a long-held breath. And so it was with Amara Fields. Nothing sudden, no lightning moment of forgiveness. But something inside her had begun to soften. She noticed things again. The sun on her skin, the breeze on her face, the way the wildflowers swayed like they remembered her name. And she noticed Gabriel Cross, always nearby, always quiet. He no longer watched her like a man waiting for a chance. He watched her like a man grateful just to witness her live. One soft afternoon, after her art class ended, Amara stepped out of the community center, a small sketchbook tucked under her arm. Gabriel stood across the field near the oak tree, holding something small in his hands. He didn't wave. Didn't call out. He just waited. She hesitated, then walked toward him, slowly, step by step. When she reached him, he held out the object in his hands, a crumpled drawing of a daisy. It was rough, childlike, the lines uneven, the stem too long. But she recognized it instantly. She laughed, really laughed. Clear and warm. You're terrible at this, she teased. He smiled, soft, rare, real. She tucked the sketch into her sketchbook, careful not to wrinkle it further. Her fingers brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. The next few days passed, like petals falling one by one. Slow, weightless, but meaningful. Amara didn't avoid his gaze anymore. She spoke to him softly, occasionally, and once, just once, she smiled at him with a kind of fondness he thought he'd never see again. He didn't press, he didn't hope, he simply cherished. One evening, she found a ring of wildflowers on her front step, not store-bought. Not arranged, just a fragile, imperfect crown, tied together with twine, daisies, reeds, clover. No note. She picked it up slowly, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She didn't wear it, but she placed it gently on the windowsill where the sun could find it each morning. The next afternoon, as the wind tousled the tall grass along Havenwood's edge, Gabriel approached her. She was sitting beneath the oak tree again, sketchbook open, sunlight dancing through her hair. He held the flower crown in both hands, slightly wilted now, the stems curling inward. She looked up as his shadow fell over her. Their eyes met. No pain this time, just quiet. He knelt before her, not with a ring, not with a plea, with the same flower crown she had once left untouched. His voice, when it came, was soft. Honest. I've said I'm sorry in 100 different ways, Amara. I've said it with flowers, with silence, with soup. But I won't say it again today. Not like that. He placed the crown on his chest like something sacred. Today I just want to tell you the truth. She held her breath. I can't offer you a perfect world, he said. I know the world has already taken too much from you, and I'm part of that pain. I'll never forget that. Her hands trembled, but she didn't interrupt. I don't ask you to forget, he whispered, or even to forgive. I just ask to walk beside you, for as long as you'll let me. The breeze caught her hair, lifted it like ribbon. She stared at him, this man who had once broken her, now kneeling in wildflowers, offering not a promise, but presence. She didn't speak for a long time. Then her voice, faint, full of everything she hadn't said in a year, broke the silence. I don't know if I'm ready. He nodded, eyes wet, but calm. That's okay. But I know this, she whispered. I don't want you to leave. His eyes closed. The weight of her words pressed into the earth around them. She reached out and touched the crown in his hands. He let her. Then she slipped it, not over her head, but over her wrist. Like a vow. It wasn't a ring, but it meant more. Yes, she said quietly. Let's build something new. Together. Not from the ashes of what they'd lost, but from the roots of what they'd both become. They sat side by side in the field. No fireworks, no grand kiss, just sunlight, wind, and two hands that had once let go, finding each other again. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. The meadow swayed around them, wildflowers dancing in the breeze, sunlight spilling across the open field like a blessing. Amara Field sat beneath the crooked oak tree, sketchbook balanced on her knees, fingers smudged with pencil and memory. Each stroke she drew was gentle, measured, a hill, a daisy, a crooked fence, a skyline of rooftops that now felt like home. A year had passed since she first arrived in Havenwood. Not to live, but to hide, to grieve, to forget. And yet, she had been found, not as the girl she used to be, but as a woman learning how to breathe again. A soft rustle behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew it was him. Gabriel Cross no longer wore suits or arrogance, just flannel shirts, rolled sleeves, and a quiet patience that had become his second skin. He approached slowly, holding something behind his back. She looked up, shielding, her eyes from the sun. Picking flowers again? She asked gently, a hint of teasing in her voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside her in the tall grass, the same way he had months ago, humbled, steady. And then he revealed what he carried, a new wildflower crown, roughly tied, a little crooked. A few petals already falling, he held it like it was priceless. Her breath caught. Julian. I know, he said softly. You're still healing, and I'll never ask you to rush that. I'm not here to fix what we lost. He met her gaze, fully now. I'm here to build something new, with whatever pieces we have left. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her heart did. It cracked open, slowly, safely. I don't ask for love, he continued. Not today. I just ask for this. Let me walk beside you. Let me show you every day that I choose you. Not because a contract says so, not because of guilt or history, but because I want to. He lifted the crown toward her, His hands trembled. Let me love you in the quiet ways. In the mornings when the sun is soft. In the evenings when you're tired. In the pauses between sentences. I'll wait. In all the in-betweens, if that's what it takes. Tears shimmered in her eyes. But they didn't fall. Because this time she didn't feel broken. She felt seen. You hurt me, she said quietly, in ways I didn't think I could survive. I know, he whispered. But somehow, through all of it, you stayed. I'll always stay. A silence passed between them, not empty, but full, of memory, of ache, of beginning. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand, held out her wrist. He slipped the flower crown over it, not a ring, but a vow. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. No kiss, no rush, just a long, quiet moment shared by two people who had lost everything, except the will to try again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, they walked back into town side by side. No one stared. No one whispered. Because Havenwood already knew. They had watched the waiting, the quiet offerings, the little signs. And now, they saw something even rarer than forgiveness. They saw love returned, not the kind in stories, the kind that is slow, earned. Real. Amara's house was no longer dark. Gabriel had fixed every bulb, every creaking hinge, every broken drawer, one by one, silently. Her garden fence gleamed white. Wildflowers lined the windows. A drawing of Havenwood sat framed by her door, and in the middle of it, two small figures, walking, a winding path together. Inside, in the soft lamp glow, Gabriel picked up a book from her nightstand, Anne of Green Gables. She watched him flip to the first page. I thought you'd never read it, she smiled. I was waiting for the right chapter, he said. She rested her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes. Start now. And so, in a small house on the edge of nowhere, a love once shattered began again. No contracts, no conditions. Just two hearts choosing one another, one day at a time. Because not every love survives the storm, but the ones that do, they bloom, again in the spring. The seasons turned, as they always do. Summer arrived in Havenwood with golden light and fields humming with bees. The air smelled of baked peaches and wild mint. Life slowed to a comforting rhythm, one soft enough for old wounds to breathe in peace. Gabriel Cross no longer owned skyscrapers. Now he owned a toolbox, a second-hand pickup, and a small heart-shaped scar on his left palm from learning to fix leaky roofs. His phone didn't buzz anymore. He didn't miss it. Each morning, he brewed coffee before sunrise. Not from a machine, but by hand, with steam curling into the quiet kitchen. 2 mugs, one for him, one for Amara Fields, who always took hers with a little honey and silence. She had grown into herself again. Differently this time. Not the girl she once was, but the woman who had survived. She painted more now. The walls of their home were lined with soft strokes of color. Daisies, hilltops, children in meadows, and sometimes a man sitting quietly with a cup of untouched coffee and hope in his eyes. She still taught art at the community center. Her class had grown. So had her heart. One morning, Gabriel was walking back from the farmer's market with a basket of peaches when he saw her sitting on their porch steps, sketchbook on her knees. She looked up, smiled. The kind of smile that still stopped him, even now. She lifted her pencil and drew the moment he appeared, carrying fruit and devotion, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass. You still see me, he said quietly, pausing at the steps. Always, she replied. He sat beside her. She rested her head on his shoulder, and in the distance, a windmill creaked lazily in the breeze. They never spoke of the past unless it was to honor it. never talked about the pain unless it was to show how far they'd come. They didn't need grand promises anymore. They had something better. Daily choosing. Some evenings, they'd walk hand in hand along the path Gabriel had once lit with solar lights. They never replaced them. Some were broken now, some didn't shine. But they left them there, because they were part of the journey, proof of the man who waited, and the woman who returned. One day, Amara found a letter in her art journal. No envelope, no name, just handwriting she'd grown to know better than her own. You once said I couldn't buy your dignity. And you were right. But you gave me something greater. You let me earn your forgiveness. You let me stay. And now, I ask this, not out of hope or desperation, but because I can't imagine a life where I don't wake up beside you. Amara, will you marry me again? Not for a contract, but for forever? She held the letter against her chest, then stepped outside. He was already waiting beneath the oak tree. No suit, no audience. Just a new wildflower ring. This time, not for her wrist. This time, it slid onto her finger. Crooked, perfect. And so, in die. The quiet town of Havenwood, where nothing much ever changed. One love story kept blooming, not because of fate, not because of grand gestures, but because two people once shattered by life chose to build something gentle. Together.